So I got one last question for you, and this is like a fun one for us. And if you want, I will give my answer first if you want some time to think about it, because
All
obviously
right.
I had time to think about this because I knew I wanted to ask you this. So, all right, who is one philosopher that you think in our contemporary moment, this contemporary moment, Biden's going to be sitting in the chair soon. Who is the one philosopher you think people really need to take to heart right now, that they really need to keep in mind going forward?
Ooh,
Yeah, it's a heavy one, huh?
that is a heavy one.
I thought of it by myself.
Well, it's a heavy one because I sort of like my mind goes to moral philosophy over political philosophy to answer that
Sure.
question, but I think maybe political philosophy would be more helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, you go first because
All right, so I'll go first. So I actually asked those same questions to myself, and I leaned on political. And look, I'm all about what folks like Levinas say. I'm all about never letting go of somebody's humanity and doing the best you can while still realizing there are limitations within that. And you can still, I think something people forget is that you can still apply all those philosophies and understand that there are limits. Well, do you think empathy has limits? Do you think empathy and sympathy have limits?
Okay, so I don't.
You don't.
I'm a moral naturalist, so I believe that empathy and emphatic thought is really much grounded in our nature. I don't think we have to look further than kin theory, for example, to see that solidarity or helping out your fellow human, there's a reward that's attached to that. I mean, you could argue that maybe that's self-serving in and of itself to think that you're only helping somebody because you gain something from it in return. But I'm not that jaded. I just think I think empathy is the natural state of things. So
I don't disagree with that. And maybe
a lot
I
of people
didn't.
do though. So
No, I know a lot of
that's
people do, but
controversial.
I know a lot of people do, but I don't. But I guess what I was getting at, and maybe I didn't ask the question that great, but like,
Oh, sorry.
what I'm getting at is like, do you think there's a time, like, for instance, I guess what I'm really asking would you empathize with an Adolf Hitler? Would you empathize with, that's what I mean when I say there are limits.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So I would never empathize with somebody like Hitler. Obviously, I'm going to empathize with the victims of Hitler.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Right. It does. So I guess like to me, that's saying there are limits, and like what this spawned from for me is like, when Donald Trump had COVID, I didn't have any empathy or sympathy for him. I just didn't.
Quite frankly, neither did I.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. And, I'm not the kind of person that's going to wish ill on anyone, but I'm not going to wish them well either. I have no wishes.
No,
I have
but
no
he's
wishes.
sort of,
I don't.
He did all of the things necessary for him to get COVID. Like he denied it existed. He didn't wear a mask. It's very difficult to have empathy with somebody that. But okay, so here's the other side of that equation. Let me bring something else into the mix.
Sure.
What about the folks that I think Trump is a part of this class? What about folks that are just psychopaths? They have psychopathy issues where that their ability to feel empathy doesn't work because they were born with that portion of their brain just simply turned off and not working. I personally think that, like, if you look at the history of psychopathy, the kind of individuals that have this trait are generally drawn into politics,
right,
and also drawn into corporate managerial positions. I think that trait maybe probably serves them well in those positions because they don't have empathy. They can make these horrible decisions and not feel guilt or care. So, I think that's part of the conversation.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Should we have empathy for a psychopath? Maybe not.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's like there are limits and people draw those limits in different places. And some people, they can just draw it as, well, my job is to look out for the company's profit. So I just don't have empathy for anyone that gets in the wake of
the way of that.
That's just how it is. And they're just void of anything.
That's an immoral position, right? This person is making an immoral choice, right?
Absolutely.
But for them, their self-serving interests are ingrained in their psychopathy. So they think they're doing something that's on task, right?
They might. I mean, I think some of them just don't care. I think in some cases they just, and not even just don't care in the sense that they don't think they're doing anything wrong, not caring in the sense where, well, I know this is wrong, but whatever, this is the world we live in, fuck you. I do think that's definitely a thing. And so, yeah, it's like, well, my empathy, my sympathy, like there are limits. It is ingrained in my nature. It's ingrained in our nature. But, you know, I do have my barriers to where it's like, no, I still recognize this person's humanity, but I look at all the evil shit they've done, and that's a bridge too far for me. I have no, you know, like whatever. And, you know, when I posted basically saying I didn't have empathy for Donald Trump, there's, well, my empathy is unconditional. My empathy is unconditional. Some people said that back to me, and I was like, okay, well, would you empathize with Hitler? Would you empathize with Adolf Hitler? And, you know, some people said no to that. And when they said no, I was just like, okay, so you do have limits. There are limits. And Hitler is beyond your limit. Mine too. Donald Trump's also above mine and not yours.
I'm with you.
You know, it's like that's all I have to say about it. I don't think it makes me right or wrong or you right or wrong. It's just how we are. Donald Trump's past my limit.
I tend to agree with you.
Joe Biden's past my limit too, by the way.
Yeah, he made the choices that led to that. Why should you feel sorry for him?
Mm-hmm.
He almost welcomed it.
So,
you know, who I feel sorry for are who's the kid of the woman in his cabinet that got it? I can't think of her name now. She was on TikTok.
Oh, I know. I forget too, but I know what you're talking about.
Somebody in the audience. I mean, I feel sorry for that kid, right? What did she do? What did she do to deserve to get COVID? Nothing. She was just around these really ridiculous adults that couldn't be responsible.
Right. Yeah. Well, so
I have empathy for her.
Right. So getting back to the question where it's like, I'm all about recognizing the humanity while still exercising the limitations that exist. Yeah. But my answer is Proudhon. And the reason Proudhon is the one, he's basically lauded as one of the first anarchist philosophers. He coined property as theft. But if you really read what he was all about and some of the stuff he said, he warned against ever creating a society where we could ever have capital upon capital upon capital. What does that sound like? Sounds like Wall Street. He warned against that. And there were other philosophers that did the same thing, but he was one of the loudest ones warning against ever creating that society. And those are the people that we need to be reading right now. You know, I mean,
I don't disagree with that.
I mean, I'm all about, you know, like in all the moral philosophy, I'm all about, I think there's a lot of great lessons you can learn in there. I don't agree with everything from most philosophers, like anything else in the world. But I think right now, you really need to look at how disastrous the system is, how we should have never done most of this, how the experiment has been hijacked many times over, and realize the systemic disease that's going on. And you get that through somebody like a Proudhon, not somebody like a Levinas or a Hegel. Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan. I agree.
Yeah.
I still haven't. I've got
now you have to have
10
one.
People in my head right now.
Well, let's throw one of them out.
Okay. So can I craft my own philosopher?
Sure.
If I was going to say there was a combination of two philosophers that if we put the best parts of their philosophy together to create something that a hybrid that I would like, it would be Karl Marx and John Rawls. And I know a lot of people are going to listen to that and think I'm totally batshit crazy, but let me explain myself.
Okay. All right.
No, I mean, I think most people are familiar with Karl Marx, right?
I've heard of him.
You've heard of him, right?
He's related to Groucho.
Also very bastardized.
Right.
I was actually I interviewed a guy this week for my podcast. His name is Dr. Asatar Bear. What a great name. And he actually looks like Karl Marx. But he had studied under Richard Wolff at University of Massachusetts. So, and he teaches here locally at Riverside. So I had him on the podcast and it ended up being a 2-hour interview. So I'm going to cut it into 2 segments. But he's a Marxist economist, right? That's what he does. And, you know, one of the things that we talked about that isn't really well discussed is the fact that Karl Marx actually had a belief that the best way to reach a socialist society was to pass through capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. So it might be interesting to consider that going through what we've been through and the fact that we're now at a late stage capitalist moment, maybe this is the ripe opportunity to really test the limits of what he theorized, right? So this is, you know, and there are various viewpoints on this, but mainly what we're looking at is not necessarily. I'm an anarcho personally. I'm an anarcho socialist. I'm libertarian socialist, which means I don't want a strong state. I want the democracy itself to own the means of production. Mm-hmm. So, and I think you and I agree on that. But I also think from a modern philosophical prospect, John Rawls makes some really interesting points about egalitarianism in a society and how hard that is to achieve. I think he is often misclassified from people on the right and also by neoliberals. I don't think a lot of people, in the same way that a lot of people don't understand Adam Smith to its fullest, a lot of people don't have Rawls that way too. I mean, his book is 900 pages long. I had to take
no pictures.
It's a big book. I took 3/4 of John Rawls just to get through that book, just to, you know, that's what a geek I am. But at base, what he's trying to get at is the fact that we're all born into different social starting places, right? So you don't know what you're going to get born into, and you don't. That's just a luck of the draw, right? You have no control over that stuff. So if you really want to have a just society, and when I use the word just, I mean the Greek sense of the word, so it's fairness. If you really want to have a just society, you have to do something about the social starting places, right? So lots of people know about his thought experiment of the veil of ignorance, right? So everybody's behind this veil. You don't know who you're going to be in life, right? You don't know if you're going to be rich or poor, black or white, female or male, intelligent or stupid. You simply don't know.
Well,
so if you
I knew I was born to rock and roll, but that's I'm an exception. But go on.
Born to rock and roll. So point being, if you don't know what you're going to be in life, and you're all there debating about what the laws are going to be, you're logically, just from pure logic, you're going to come up with what he calls the minimum maximum position, which is like the least advantage, the floor of what you're going to accept has to be just enough where everybody accepts it as okay, right? This is the floor.
Right.
So, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So maybe if we applied some of Karl Marx's criticism of capitalism and, you know, his idea of collectivism, if we applied that stuff with this aspect of what John Rawls is getting at as far as different social starting places, I think we'd have a pretty robust philosophy about what our politics should look like.
I agree 100%. No, I feel like your answer is better than mine. Now you cheated, but
I cheated. Oh, because I made up a new guy.
You made two. No, I'm just kidding. That's an excellent answer, and yeah, because I think it's like Marx, the critiques, like you're saying, and then Rawls, because like what you would get at, what the conclusion would be, is that the floor needs to rise.
Yeah, see, so the thing is Karl Marx is talking about the idealized society in the sense that this is what we would all benefit from these policies, right? And his criticism of capitalism is really on par. Even if you don't like where Karl Marx is going with his conclusions, you have to give him credit for his criticisms because they're all true. Mm-hmm. And they're all coming true in real time. It's very interesting that we live in a space where we're seeing that happen, right? So, but he doesn't really address the moral aspects. And I think even though John Rawls is really isn't considered a moral philosopher, a lot of what he talks about is really steeped in moral philosophy. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
No, that totally does. No, that totally does. I mean, I've not read a lot of him. I've read more Marx than Rawls, but yeah, no, that makes total sense. I think that's an excellent answer for our contemporary moment. Because the floor is out of whack and capitalism is a disaster.
Right.
And it always will be, because he was writing a long time ago. It did the same shit then.
Oh, 100%. I mean, John Rawls is definitely more contemporary, obviously. But if I could, like, for example, so when you get into the end of Rawls' positions, when he does talk about economics, he's more interested in creating what he calls equality of opportunity. It's more of a utilitarian argument. But if you replaced that bit with the anarcho-socialism, like that to me would be ideal. That's my ideal thought process of what I would like to see.
I think me too. Yeah, I think we're pretty on the same page there. My thing with the state, like I think the only thing where it's like I'm not a straight up mutualist is because I do think there needs to be I think in a perfect society, or as close to perfect as we're going to get, I mean, obviously there's no such thing, but I think you would have the state to just kind of oversee make sure the municipalities are doing what they're supposed to, and no one gets left out. I think that would be the state's role, to make sure that there's never a situation. I mean, I'm all about, in my ideal society, we would pretty much have a worker-owned cooperative,
Yeah, 100%.
like publicly funded market socialist society. And then within that, the role of the state would be to make sure that there was never a scenario where Beverly Hills had everything and everywhere
Yeah,
else in Los Angeles had nothing, just as a for instance. That would be the state's role, to make
So I
sure something
wanna
like that didn't happen.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your